A few years ago, there was only my wife Laura, 36, my daughter Emma, 10, my son Ethan, 7, and me, Mark Thompson, 40. We weren't the happiest family in our small Midwestern town, but we tried to keep the peace. Maybe we just went along with it because we thought it was better for the kids. But one Thursday afternoon after work, everything changed. I stopped by the liquor store and unexpectedly ran into Mike Johnson, a high school classmate. It had been years since I had seen Mike, and since the store was busy, we had plenty of time to catch up. We were both surprised to find out that Mike's wife, Karen, had been working in the same office as Laura for the past 6 months. Mike looked at me and said, "We didn't see you at the Christmas party, and our wives' offices spoke on the phone last month. Are you planning to go to their boss's farewell party?" I replied that I would love to go, but I hadn't been invited. Mike seemed taken aback. "Of course you are invited. Every spouse is invited. Why don't you come? I'll check with Karen, but I think you should come and see your old friends." The big company's party was 2 months after Christmas because the old owners had sold their shares to the National Investment Group. The farewell party was their way of thanking everyone before the new management officially took over on 1 April. I hadn't forgotten that the Christmas party was the first one Laura had been to since she started her new job, and she told me straight away that I wasn't invited. She'd even bought herself a new outfit and looked as pretty as ever. She didn't get home until a little drunk and not as perky as usual. After some prevarication, she assured me that nothing had happened that night. They had just gone to a friend's house for a drink after the party, she said. I don't know her. I pressed on. "Okay, Mike mentioned that all spouses were invited to your office Christmas party. Who was your date that night and where did you go afterwards?" She went pale. "I already told you," she replied. "I don't think the spouses were invited. I've only been at work for a short time. I must have missed the invitation." "Let me get this straight," I said suspiciously. "You mean to say you're the only person in the company who didn't understand a simple invitation?" I couldn't hold back any longer. "I'll find out who you were with that night. Believe me, they'll all regret going there." Her tears started to flow again. "I've already explained to you countless times. It was just a small group of people. We went to a colleague's house, had a few drinks, danced a little. You have no reason to be jealous." But her story was full of holes. I couldn't believe it. Nevertheless, I knew I needed hard evidence before I could pursue the matter, so I asked her if she'd been invited to the next company party. She didn't say anything, looked a little overwhelmed, but answered, "Of course, I've already booked for us. I just forgot to tell you." Something told me she was hiding something. At that time, our marriage was on the rocks, and it was almost impossible for us to have any real intimacy. To make matters worse, the following Friday, I took a few hours off work to take care of some things, and Laura's work usually finished around 2 p.m. on Friday afternoons. When we were both at home, the phone rang. I picked it up, but no one spoke. I heard a faint sound as if it were coming from someone's car stereo, but the person hung up without saying anything. When Laura asked who it was, I told her I guessed it was your lover, mentioning that they fell silent as soon as they heard my voice. I had intended to make a harmless joke, but Laura took a moment to fire back. "You're completely crazy. What are you accusing me of again?" I was caught off guard. I tried to extricate myself from the situation by saying that it was just a joke, but after seeing her reaction, I began to wonder if my hunch was not entirely unfounded. Her voice softened a little. It became even softer. "No, you're wrong. This is just you being jealous again. I'm sorry I overreacted. It's been a long day at work, but that's no excuse." I took her apology to mean that she wanted to explain her reaction that evening. Laura was dressed unusually plainly that evening, a far cry from the vivacious and cheerful Laura we knew. The party was being held at one of the best hotels in town, and dinner was served at round tables rather than the usual long table layout. Sitting with 4 other couples, it was clear that Laura knew all the ladies at our table. I always felt that she would have preferred not to have me there, as I was getting in the way of her enjoying the evening. After we had finished eating, we started drinking coffee and cognac. Her boss came over to our table to chat, and when he saw me sitting next to Laura, he said, "You must be Laura's husband. We missed you at the Christmas party. It's a shame you couldn't come." I replied that I hadn't received an invitation, at least that's what Laura had told me. He glanced at Laura, looked puzzled, and replied, "All spouses were invited. How could you have missed it?" I continued, "She got home late and looked exhausted, so I guess she preferred to be with her colleagues rather than with me." The other couples at the table laughed awkwardly, while Laura's face turned scarlet. Her boss looked uncomfortable, forced a smile and muttered, "I don't know." Then he continued, "I told you, there are over 200 employees. You should know who is and who isn't." Laura started to cry at this point, and the couples at our table, one after the other, excused themselves to go to the bathroom. I also needed a minute, so I went to the men's bathroom, where I struck up a conversation with another husband, who casually mentioned that he and his wife had sat near Laura at the Christmas party, and he said she had been making out with a male colleague all night. He remembered her because his wife had commented on Laura's unusual surname. I never thought I would be the kind of person to discover the truth about their spouse's infidelity by accident, but the feeling grew stronger and stronger, like a punch in the stomach. I had certainly noticed that things had cooled between Laura and me recently, but I had assumed it was just part of the ebb and flow that every marriage goes through. I thought we would get back to normal in time, but that night, after Laura left the table, I never saw her again. One of her colleagues told me that she had left the party early because her phone hadn't rung and the babysitter hadn't answered. I knew she must have gone home and sent the babysitter away. I stayed at the bar for a while, relieved that no one had mentioned Laura's sudden departure. When I finally got home, I found her asleep in our bed, and the next day was the worst day of our 13 years together. Laura yelled and cried, but resolutely refused to tell me where she had gone after the Christmas party. On Monday, she went back to work as if nothing had happened. Thankfully, no one in the office mentioned the awkward dinner, and even her boss seemed to treat it as a private matter between us. Her colleagues' gossip behind her back was a different matter entirely. I thought the next surprise would come on Friday evening, when I least expected it, and Laura took the initiative to draw us closer together. This time she was more enthusiastic than ever, experimenting with new positions and full of energy completely unlike her. It was a welcome change from her usual more reserved approach. I couldn't help wondering if her sudden interest had anything to do with my recent comments about a possible affair. I fell asleep almost immediately, but my mind wouldn't calm down. I began to wonder if she liked the more perceptive, decisive me better than my usual laid-back self. The following week was uneventful, and I began to think that perhaps our relationship was improving a little. Our marriage seemed to be stabilizing again, but just when I thought everything was back on track, it all suddenly fell apart. One morning, Laura was dressed a little nicer than usual, and her hair was neatly combed, which she rarely did. At breakfast, she casually mentioned that she might need to work overtime, as her boss had hinted at the previous day. "I've been holding it in for a while, but I can't hold back any longer." I asked her, "Since when do you need to dress up to work overtime? And why don't you just say you're going to see your lover again?" A flash of surprise crossed her face, and then she asked in return, "Are you crazy? You really need help because of your paranoid temper." She yelled, "Maybe it would be better if we ended this marriage." I retorted, "So you can be with him openly instead of sneaking around behind my back." I may be paranoid, but I'm not stupid enough to stay in a marriage with a cheating wife. Laura suddenly burst into tears, and even our child, who had overheard our words, began to cry as well. At this point, I realized that I had caused the worst argument in our marriage, and I had not the slightest bit of evidence. I only had this nagging feeling that kept me up at night. In the long silence, her sobs filled the room. Laura finally asked, "Do you really want a divorce?" I said, "Yes. If you want to ruin our marriage, I don't see any other way out. We might as well split up now and get on with our lives. I'm sick of this treatment. I'm sick of it." Laura hurried back to the bedroom, leaving me alone to face what I had just done. A wave of guilt washed over me. I had accused her of such a serious crime without any evidence. Her of such a serious crime. I know I acted impulsively and completely wrongly. I should have taken the time to gather some hard evidence before confronting her with my baseless accusations. A few minutes later, Laura returned to the kitchen, dressed as usual as if nothing had happened. She didn't say a word, and I didn't know what to say to her. I suddenly realized that if she was innocent, then a miracle would be needed to save our marriage. The hurt and humiliation I had put her through might be unforgivable. If she was guilty, our marriage would end right there and then. That evening, when I couldn't find any real evidence, Laura told me that she had spoken to her boss and explained that I didn't want her to work overtime. She said that the boss had no problem with that because he had met me at the party, and I had seen him before. I should have called her boss to confirm this, but I didn't. Unexpectedly, the new boss at Laura's company gave me unexpected help. Their IT department had conducted an in-depth investigation into how employees use the computers and found that around 45 minutes a day was spent on personal matters. but one employee stood out as spending 15 hours online in just 1 week. The following Monday, all employees were called to a meeting, and the new management announced a strict policy of banning personal internet use, saying that it would help save time and money. After the change of management, 4 new employees lost their jobs, but Laura kept her position. After that, she could only use the computer at home to handle all personal emails. Her children had their own computers, but they could not connect to the internet. I have always been good at computer programs, and I feel that this game has finally come to my home court. I have long been prepared for this turn of events. I installed a mirroring program on the computer that can save everything Laura does, and I added a program that can restore any files she tried to delete within a few days. Laura created a new email account on our computer called Bright Sunset, alongside her usual Gmail address, which she mainly used for casual chats with friends who had moved out of town. This new account mainly received spam, and occasionally a real email from someone called Happy Traveler. In the first week, Laura's messages on this new account were harmless. She informed Happy Traveler of her new email address and mentioned that she was back online. His first reply seemed harmless enough. Just my best friend is back online, but I know there's more to come. I'm optimistic and believe that we'll soon discover something meaningful. I'm sure they can still use their mobile phones for most communication, especially now that Laura only has access to the family computer. But I have a feeling she'll still use email for long chats. I've made up my mind that if Laura cheats on us and causes our divorce, she will not get any of my hard-earned money. I have spent years creating a decent life for my family, and her lover will not benefit from it. With this in mind, I quietly began to make plans to protect my assets. As I am the sole owner of our house, I can apply for a large loan for investment purposes without Laura's signature. To my surprise, the bank approved the loan without hesitation and fully met my requirements. The next day, I told Laura that I had to go on a business trip to Italy to finalize negotiations for the purchase of new equipment. She didn't raise any objections or ask any questions, as I had had similar experiences in the past. The next day, I went to the local travel agency and booked a cheap flight, not to Italy but to Madrid in Spain. I also asked them to arrange a hotel for me in a small town near the Portuguese border. As I expected, Laura didn't contact my workplace to confirm that I had taken 3 days leave. I flew to Madrid and took a local bus to the border town and into Portugal. I didn't do anything illegal, like money laundering. The next morning, I spent some time sightseeing in the quaint town. I took the first flight back to Madrid and then home. Throughout the trip, I paid with my personal credit card whenever possible, so that if someone decided to investigate when I got home, they could easily track my movements. I continued to monitor Laura's computer activity, but unfortunately found nothing, except a message from Happy Traveler saying that he was alone in his hotel room and wished she was there with him. Laura didn't reply to the email, so I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower, but as usual, she had deleted all the messages. Finally, I found Pay Dirt. Happy Traveler had sent her an email with the very details I had been waiting for. The email read, "Dear, I'm sorry, I'm meeting some important clients in the north, away from you, and your hated husband is supposedly in Italy. I miss your sweet kisses and warm hugs very much." Every night Chris continued in his emails. "I know you're waiting for me, and I have good news. Next Thursday I have the whole day free, except for a quick visit to the dentist between 9 and 10 a.m. After that, the rest of the day is ours. Please be there after 11 a.m. so we can spend some quality time together. Just you and me, darling," and some clues to his name and schedule. I thought Laura might reply, and she did. "Dear Chris, of course I'll be available after 11 a.m. How about a quiet lunch at your place so we don't have to risk being seen together in town? I'm sure Mark is still suspicious, so it would be wise to keep a low profile. Taking a day off would be good for both of us. I've been thinking about you and can't wait to be with you. Love, Laura." At that moment, I knew I had to act quickly. Fortunately, I had already rented an apartment and paid a year's rent in advance, as I expected a possible dispute with the authorities during the divorce. Unfortunately, Chris's surname and his job as a salesman led me to suspect that he worked in Laura's office, but I wasn't completely sure. The one detail I had missed was the exact place and time of their next meeting, so unless I got more information, following her to his house could be a long process. Most people rely on their phones for communication, and Laura and Chris were obviously no exception, as I was unable to gather any more information from the computer I had prepared the day before their planned meeting. We drained our joint and personal bank accounts and transferred the funds through secure channels in case things escalated. I also rented a van with tinted windows and prepared to take action the morning of her big day. To my surprise, Laura acted completely normally that morning. She wasn't wearing anything special, her hair was the same as usual, and there was no sign that she was going to spend the day with her lover. I began to hope that she would cancel the appointment, but I couldn't hide my nervousness, and Laura noticed it. She asked me with a worried look, "Are you all right? You look a little pale." What was I supposed to say? I simply said that I was fine, that I just had some work issues to deal with today, but that everything was under control. She didn't seem convinced. "I'm just worried that you seem stressed." I tried to reassure her that there was nothing to worry about and that I was fine. "By the way, let's have lunch together. I have something important I want to discuss with you." She hesitated, looking uneasy, and replied, "I'd love to, but I've already made an appointment for an important lunch meeting. How about tomorrow?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I understand you should attend to important matters first." For a moment, her face turned pale, as if she were reconsidering her plans. I could only hope that was the case because the future of our family depended on her choices in the next few hours. I was afraid this might be the last breakfast our family would have together, and the lunch I wanted to eat might never materialize. Laura had gone to work, dropped Ethan off at kindergarten on the way, and Emma had gone to school. I stayed at home a little longer, then set off at 10:30 a.m. I parked outside the office, in a position that would allow me to monitor her car and the staff entrance. The windows were dark, so I was completely invisible from the outside. At a.m., Laura walked out of the building, went straight to her car, and drove off towards a residential area outside the city center. She parked in front of an apartment building and went inside. I followed her carefully, checking the building directory and noting every detail. Sure enough, I found the name Chris Jensen, who lived in an apartment on the second floor. I waited 5 minutes before calling Laura's mobile phone. When she saw my name on the screen, she picked up and asked, "Hello, what's up? Honey, what's wrong with you?" I replied, "What do you mean? No, I haven't lost my mind, but I found your lover. Tell me, are you at work or somewhere else? I'm on my way there now, and you'd better get dressed and leave before I arrive." There was a tense silence, and her voice sounded nervous as she replied, "What are you talking about?" "Of course I'm at work. If this is true, congratulations, and if not, you'll be sorry." I hung up. I stood outside Chris's apartment door, sledgehammer in one hand and a black bin bag in the other, just cue. A man in his 30s opened the door, and I hit him in the face without hesitation. He staggered back in shock, Laura standing behind him, white as a sheet. "Get out!" I yelled at Ed. Before she knew what was happening, I pushed her out of the apartment and locked the door behind her. It was just me and Chris. I pounded on him until he fell to the ground. On any other day, the young, strong guy might have put up a fight, but he was completely defenseless, and I was so full of rage that it was easy to punch and kick him. As he lay groggy on the floor, I picked up the sledgehammer and destroyed everything in sight. His small, sparsely furnished apartment showed that it wasn't really his home, just a place where he did his part-time job. I rummaged through the briefcase and took his mobile phone and some documents with his home address and personal details. Laura was outside frantically ringing the doorbell, shouting, "Don't hurt him, please don't." I opened the door, dragged her back inside, growled, "He's all yours now, do whatever you want with him," because I couldn't care less about either of you. She gasped when she saw the destruction around her. Chris was lying on the floor, bruised and bleeding. The apartment was a mess. She started to cry and begged me to listen to her explanation. "Mark, please listen to me." I told her to shut up. I went back to the car and sat there sorting through Chris's papers. Laura was a saleswoman for the same company and had a family near the capital, which explained why he had a small retreat in our town. Chris ruined my marriage, and as the saying goes, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I had one last thing to do, so I called Laura's parents and asked if they could look after the kids after school, explaining that I had to work late and that Laura had to deal with a personal problem. They agreed without asking any questions. Then I turned off my phone, climbed into the van and drove away for 2 days to try and sort my thoughts. Unfortunately, I can't reveal the exact details of this trip, especially since this forum has many Midwestern readers, some of whom might investigate what I did. I don't want to get any innocent people involved. 2 days later, back in town, I turned my phone back on and found it full of messages from Laura. My only response was a simple text message, I'm filing for divorce. It's final. That day, I moved my clothes and personal belongings from our house to my new apartment, leaving the divorce papers on the kitchen table. It was then that I knew for sure Laura and Chris's affair had been going on for months. If it had just been a one-time mistake after the Christmas party, maybe I would have forgiven her. Or if she had canceled her date with him after our last family breakfast, it wouldn't have happened. The next day at work, Chris got his ass kicked. I was a little surprised that Laura hadn't tried to contact me. The only call I received about Chris was from the police, who wanted to discuss the matter. But as Laura and I both had busy schedules, we agreed to meet 3 weeks later. Later, I called Laura's mother, who mentioned that the children had stayed with her for a few days, and Laura had not objected. 3 days after the divorce, Laura called me, furious and wondering why our net worth had plummeted to zero. She threatened to sue me and accused me of destroying Chris's apartment. I calmly told her that money could be earned again, but that the love and trust in the family could not be restored. This did not satisfy her. 3 weeks later, my lawyer and I attended a police meeting. The officers were polite, accusing me of assaulting Chris so badly that he was unable to work for several weeks, and damaging his apartment and house. I denied all the allegations, admitting only to self-defense when he attacked me in desperation. When I confronted them, the police officers seemed reluctant to press charges. I sensed that he didn't sympathize with the plight of a cheating wife and her lover. Even if they decided that I owed Chris compensation, I wasn't too worried. I had no money, so any judgment would be his problem, not mine. Then, unexpectedly, Laura volunteered that we could meet at a restaurant to discuss the children. I agreed, and our conversation was polite throughout. I was surprised when she openly admitted to having an affair with Chris. She explained that it had happened a few weeks after she started her new job, which coincided with the restructuring of the sales department. Laura had always worked as Chris's assistant, and the two had fallen in love at first sight. Lunch in his small apartment quickly developed into something more intimate. The ongoing relationship, she described how they kept meeting despite the limited opportunities they had to do so, as Chris rarely visited the headquarters and his wife could not attend the Christmas party. Chris saw this as a great opportunity to spend most evenings with Laura. She had reservations, but agreed after he persuaded her. She claims this was the biggest mistake of her life. Although Laura insists that me and her family have always been the most important thing to her, even after I started accusing her of cheating. According to her, after our argument, she and Chris had already planned to end the relationship, and she was trying to prove her loyalty to me. She claimed that although she and Chris had briefly discussed their future lives, she would not hesitate to leave him if I gave her another chance. I told her I was sorry, but the pain was too great. We agreed that she would have primary custody of the children, but that they could visit me whenever they wanted. After a pause, she asked for money, and when I explained that I had lost everything because of some risky investments, I saw tears well up in her eyes. That's the price you pay for getting rid of me. I said that I had lost my family, which was a far higher price, and that family meant more to me than any amount of money. Laura once again begged us to rebuild our family, as long as I forgave her and took her back. She didn't look happy when I told her that I would rather have an unfaithful ex-wife than a wife who was still cheating. An unfaithful wife, not a wife who was still cheating before we split up. I warned her that hiring a lawyer would not change anything, and that trying to recover the money lost would only waste her time and increase the lawyer's fees without bringing her anything of value. On Monday morning, my secretary Sophie came in, and I could tell at once that something serious had happened. She was wearing sunglasses, and when she took them off, I could see that she had a black eye on the left side and looked in pain. Her right eye was also swollen, as if she had been crying all weekend. At first she refused to tell me what had happened, but after a few minutes she broke down and said that I was now a single mother. I asked Greg what had happened, and we broke up. She replied, and I was stunned, because I had always thought that Sophie and Greg were the ideal couple. Why I was asking, she explained that being hit by your husband once is a terrible experience that you may be able to forgive, but when it happens a second time, it's a pattern. A man who hits his wife twice will only do it again, and the reasons will become less and less valid. Greg hit me again, and now I'm divorcing him. I always thought Greg was a decent man, so this news came as a shock to me. I thought you two were great together. Why did he turn out like that? He hit me for the first time at the wedding, she replied, when I danced a tango with a handsome South American. It was just a harmless dance, but Greg lost his temper and hit me. None of the other men seemed to mind their wives dancing with this man, but Greg lost control after a while. I forgave him, but told him if it happened again, we were finished. He promised it wouldn't happen again, but it did. What was the reason this time? I asked him, and he thought it was my fault. You broke up with Laura. I was confused. Laura and that bastard Chris, it just didn't make sense. She sighed. Greg convinced himself it was because you and I were having an affair. I was so shocked I almost shouted, "You and I were having an affair? When? We had nothing but a working relationship." She let out a small, sad laugh. I knew neither of us knew anything about it, but Greg believed it and hit me for it. It's hard to believe that someone like Greg could become so irrational as to force his wife to divorce him over something that never happened. I've certainly always admired Sophie, but I've never crossed the line and never taken any action. Although I might prefer Sophie from another world to Laura, I would never betray my wife. I couldn't believe it. I shook my head and said, "Why didn't he just come to me?" I have never betrayed Laura, even though I have had moments of temptation over the years. Naturally, I can't deny that I envy him for marrying the woman of my dreams. But there is a world of difference between a mere thought and actual infidelity. How could he have come up with such a ridiculous idea? Rumors, Sophie replied. Apparently some of Greg's friends had heard the rumors and told him. Rumors? Why didn't he ask any of us for the truth? How could he believe something so outrageous without asking? She grimaced. Oh, he asked, only with his fists instead of words. Unbelievable, I muttered. Still can't believe it. Sophie tried to smile and joked, "Now that your dream guy is single, is it your place or mine?" I grinned. "Your place is fine," she replied. About an hour later, she asked softly, "Are you really serious about that date?" I flashed her my brightest smile and wasn't going to back down. "You're offering a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Are you sure you're giving me anything?" She teased. "No, I admit, but a date is still a date, right?" She laughed. "Okay, a date is a date." We laughed and talked about our new single lives. But there was an unspoken understanding between us. This day had the potential to change our lives in ways we could never have imagined. The tension between us grew, and eventually Sophie decided to take the day off after lunch. After work, I went out to run a few errands and then came home. To be honest, I didn't expect Sophie to come, but at PM she was standing in front of my door with a small suitcase in her hand. She smiled at me and said, "Just in case you really want to go on a date with me." I replied, "Yes." I invited her in. It had been a difficult day for her, especially after her meeting with the lawyer. So I suggested that she take a rest and I would prepare dinner. After dinner, we sat on the sofa and talked about our broken marriages. Sophie asked me several times if I had considered making peace with Laura, and I assured her each time that it was out of the question. We went to bed early that night, but I refrained from any intimate advances. To my surprise, Sophie slept soundly, and in the morning she seemed a little better. The following weekend, we rented a minivan and took her children and mine to the zoo. We all had a great day, and the children got along really well. We realized that it might be possible to bring our families together and live together. On Sunday evening, Sophie dropped the children off at her parents' house, and I took mine. After dropping the children off, Laura and I had a romantic dinner at the best restaurant in town. When we got back to the apartment, we started kissing as soon as we closed the door, hurriedly removing each other's clothes, and collapsed on the bed. Sophie didn't hesitate to go with the flow, and we relaxed and made love again, this time more slowly and tenderly. Sophie whispered that she felt very happy, because it was a beautiful first time, full of love, intense and tender. We were both satisfied, especially me, because Sophie showed the passion that Laura had lacked during the months she had been with us during the divorce proceedings. Laura's lawyer found out about my trip to Portugal and tried to attack me on that. I faced a lot of questions about that trip, but I always stuck to the truth, and they couldn't pin anything on me. Despite Laura's lawyer spending a lot of time tracking down the missing money, the divorce turned out as I expected. Laura got nothing, but had to pay 50% of the divorce settlement and a huge amount of legal fees. Laura asked me, "How could you take all our money? How could you do this to me?" Her eyes were full of tears. I looked at her and said, "How could you cheat on me? How could you do this to me?" Her answer caught me off guard because I was the fool, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. "Chris knows you regret it?" I asked. "Yes, he regrets his part in this mess too," she admitted. "We've paid a heavy price for our actions, but we're trying to learn from it." "Are you happy now with the woman you truly love?" I reminded her that at our last family breakfast, I gave you a fair choice and you chose to meet Chris instead of having lunch with me. It was the worst mistake of your life, but not mine. She nodded. I know I lost the one I love. Chris and I were the losers in the marriage, but we were doing our best to move on. Then she asked, Are you happy? I answered yes. I'm very happy with Sophie, but neither of us wants a divorce. We both want our parents to be together for our child. Right now we're happy together, and we're making the most of the life we have. In the end, Laura and Chris bought my old house at a good price and took over all the loans, which meant their monthly repayments were much higher than when we had lived there. Living there, meanwhile, Sophie's ex-husband bought his share of the house at a reasonable price and invested the money in a new house, which she and I moved into. The police never returned to ask Chris about the damage to the house near the Capitol. Apparently, such things don't matter there. Due to a lack of police resources and difficulties with regional cooperation, the case was never resolved. I heard through the grapevine that Chris's wife was actually the owner of the house and received most of the insurance settlement. I ended up spending 2 months in white-collar prison and was ordered to pay Chris compensation for the assault and damage to the apartment. I didn't pay him a penny and I have no intention of doing so. Of course, I promised him I would pay him as soon as I had the money, but as long as I was bankrupt, the authorities could do nothing to help him recover the money. Sophie and I both left our old jobs. She now ran a consulting firm, and I worked part-time, drove the company car, and rented a room in her house. It was perfect for both of us. Meanwhile, Laura never stopped looking for the missing money. One evening, she invited Sophie to a bar under the pretext of discussing the children, but after a few drinks, she began to interrogate her about the money. Sophie told her the truth, saying that she knew nothing about it and didn't care because for me, I'm the best thing that ever happened to me. Sophie and I have always worked well together, and now we have a strong family bond. We have a lot of laughs and share a wonderful, intimate life. My children love Sophie, and her children are very affectionate towards me. Things are going well until there are rumors that Greg, Sophie's ex-husband, is bragging about winning her back. He has been in therapy and claims that he has finally overcome his problems. I keep quiet about this and let Sophie handle things herself. Her own parents don't accept her decision to leave Greg and keep trying to convince her to reconcile with him. They called her at least once a week, bribing her with new cars or luxury holidays if she would consider giving him another chance. One evening I noticed a worried expression on Sophie's face. She told me that she had been invited to the wedding of Greg's sister. She said, I really want to go, but if you don't mind, I'll just stay at home. Why should I care? I asked, well, because I'm worried that Greg's parents will be pushing for us to get back together, and a wedding is a romantic setting that might be the perfect opportunity for them to do so, and maybe I'd better not go. But I get along really well with his sister, and I'd really like to go, if you really don't mind. I shrugged and said, You're an adult. If you want to go, go. I feel like supporting her on her big day, and who knows, maybe this is her way of closing that chapter of her life. Are you really sure you don't mind? She asked again. No, I don't see any reason to object. I said, There might be drinking, and I need to stay the night, aren't you worried? Why should I be worried? I replied, like I said, you're an adult. I'm sure you can handle it. I love you. I love you too. She said that Greg's house was about 40 miles away, so Sophie set off early on Saturday morning, planning to return on Sunday. We agreed to try to make fewer phone calls, so she just told me briefly that she had arrived safely and wished me a good time at the wedding. She gave me a hug and kiss before leaving, but I admit that Saturday was a difficult day for me. I was more worried about the trip than I thought I would be, and about the pressure Greg, his parents and their friends would be putting on her. Laura was babysitting the kids at the weekend, so I focused on work for most of Saturday. That evening, I went out for dinner and a few drinks with some friends. Although I didn't stay out long, I bought a comedy DVD to pass the time and went to bed after watching it. To my surprise, Sophie came home at a.m. on Sunday. She gave me a warm hug and whispered, "Come with me." She took me straight to the bedroom. Once there, she took off her clothes, pulled me down on the bed, and whispered in my ear, "Oh, I love you so much. Make love to me." I obeyed her without hesitation. Afterwards, she asked did you feel surprised that you were so well prepared? You did surprise me, but in the best possible way. I said I was glad you trusted me enough to go to the wedding, even though you knew Greg's family might try to get you back together. I know you trust me, she replied, and I made it clear that I wasn't interested in getting back together. She went on to tell me that some of Greg's relatives were spending the night at his parents' house, and they had arranged for her and Greg to stay in a small room with just one bed. Fortunately, Greg's sister had given her advance notice, and Sophie had anticipated the situation. She had booked herself a hotel room and would leave the wedding as soon as the drunken reconciliation suggestions got out of hand. She even had Sunday dinner with Greg's family and left the hotel early after breakfast. One thing was certain, Sophie and I had established a strong foundation of trust and commitment. The following week, Laura and I met at a cafe to discuss the kids' plans. When I asked her if she had a problem with Chris, she looked even more unhappy than usual. She admitted, honestly, that yes. If you asked me to go back, I would not hesitate to do so. I was not surprised, as my children had mentioned some tension between Laura and Chris. He cheated on his wife, and I believe you were not the only one. Is he cheating on you now? Laura started to cry as soon as I finished asking, and her sobs were uncontrollable. She didn't answer my question, but her silence told me everything.